In fact, I remember an example where someone is wanting to talk, and the facilitator is just like, quiet the person so they can remain in the space and keep processing. So a suggestion might be to facilitators, if the person is becoming too vocal and cognitizing the experience, to let them be quiet until they really are ready to move around. And moving around then will probably be the indication that they're actually awake and out of it and then ready to talk. Just a thought, okay? But that seemed to me that was like a lesson to go away with it. The person may be unconscious and have low magnitude of brain activity, but the brain is very busy, and frequencies associated with everyday tasks, like sort of the routine, automatic tasks, are suppressed. What are habits, by the way? Are habits routine activities, automatic activities? Yeah. So what happens when they get repressed? When that part of the automatic thinking gets pushed down? That means that there's room created maybe to have new activity there. So it's not just about, oh, like I feel something in my body and now I'm having an insight, or I'm having an insight and then I really feel that insight strongly has meaning. It also means like the stuff that's like the habitual, automated stuff is like pushed out of the way a little bit. That's a hypothesis. Okay, what's going on? We need to like thoroughly look at that and to explore that, but that's sort of my working hypothesis there. And then automatic, habitual, reward-based cognition, suppressed. So all the things that come with like, especially low, medium beta, so like challenge activities, all of that. It's like, you're not working on Wall Street while you're in the 5-MeO experience. There's a reason maybe why people move away from that kind of thinking. In contrast, frequencies linked with body connection and insight and learning are greatly enhanced. And the effect may be two-directional. I think that's really important. I don't know. I really honestly don't know. It's just a hypothesis. The neocortex is really open to information from the lower brain. That could be something that's going on, and the vagal nerve system. It's part of feeding into the limbic system. And the brain, and by the way, some of the vagal nerve system also goes directly to the neocortex, as we've been discovering only recently in the last year. And the brain is in an insight and consolidation mode to make sense of that sensory information to learn something new. Conversely, the learnings that are written, that you have this insight, are then written downward into the lower brain, the vagal nerve system, such that the person feels the insight. That's why they go on and they're like, oh yeah, it's really true. Like, yeah, I can feel it. People who do entheogens, they can go back almost and they're like, it has an effect. It hasn't, so if the habit-changing behavior, they're like, I feel so motivated to change. Why is that? Because they feel it. It's not just a cognitive thing. So I have a sense, I don't know what ratio these are, or if this really is the dynamic, but based on sort of what we know about these brain waves, I sort of have that working kind of thing. And this is just brain waves. It's not talking about any of the wiring. The brain wiring does shift, and we see global coordinated activation across the entire neocortex as regions move in lockstep with each other, all of them together. And the experience can be highly visual, so this right occipital area, I think we all know that. A lot of entheogens have a strong visual component, but it still affords, in his case, he still had goal-focused behavior up in here. He still had a little bit of executive activity that could be around things like, what is your intention? And speech, this region over here for him was still pretty well connected as well. This left anterior temporal area was pretty active. So inside his experience, he was talking. Now, people don't always have talking. I suspect some of that is just like unique to his experience. We'd want to look at more people. But it does tell me like debriefing people after the experience is important, as well as just looking at the brain activity. I want to know, like, did you have dialogue in it or something like that? And I didn't even ask that. I just took notes and let him talk. And then he talked about talking. So that was the cool piece. So it gives a sense, at the very least, that 5-MeO shifts the brain in a way that allows us to get more body connected, to be more in an insight and sensory consolidations. The sensory stuff comes up from the body and gets consolidated, and there's some learning about it. That the executive regions, decision-making, explanation kinds of stuff, the self-critical pieces that are more in like the left frontal area of the brain, like those get turned off a little bit. Brain waves associated with habitual, like automatic behaviors, are suppressed. I don't know, we got some interesting pieces going on here. Even if half of these are true, I think that this really gives a sense now of like, oh, okay, yeah, I can see why it has an influence. In fact, if we could do meditation, now I have some good ideas of what might be some goals to see results of brain change during meditation, regular old meditation. Not that there's such a thing as regular old meditation. So we're halfway through, and are there questions? And we will have a break in a moment, but yes?
Does Dr. Villanueva, what was his name?
Yeah, Villanueva? Yeah.
Villanueva, does he also use the synthetic or the wild bufo? No?
I've never actually asked him that.
Yeah,
That's a good question. That's a very good question. I should ask, yes. Yeah.
I don't know that.
Is there a difference in theory? That in theory, they would do the exact same molecule.
Yeah, I think people describe that the organic harvested one is like a little bit smoother experience and has a little bit more body to it. So I suppose if you're a wine connoisseur, it's like the difference between wines. Other people say, no, there's no real discernible difference between them. Just make sure you measure the synthetic one correctly. Yeah, because it's not the same amount as the other one. Yeah, that's a very good question. Thank you. Yeah.
So I know this, it seems like research in this area is pretty new compared to other entheogens. There's not a lot.
Yes, that's right.
So
yeah.
I mean, it sounds like some of what you described sounds more to me like NMDMT, like more visual and aliens.
Yeah.
Because I've heard that for 5 it's less common. So
It is less common, but people do report that sometimes.
It's
Yeah.
interesting. So for the other 2 researchers, did they ask also what the narrative, what was going on?
No,
They didn't ask that.
Or they even if they did, they didn't record that.
Okay.
Like that's not part of their papers or whatever. But that's been that's how I roll for years. Is like do debrief afterwards with people, regardless of. Yeah.
Yeah, because it'd be interesting to see if they had a mystical experience. If you could try to
Oh, I think like in general sense, yes, but that wasn't like it was considered subjective data, and they're just trying to publish a paper that's
Dr. Acosta does. I actually got brain mapped with Dr. Acosta.
Oh, that's great. Oh, wow, that's
last
fantastic.
year.
Okay.
I had no idea what I was coming to. My friend just brought me. I didn't even know what I was walking into today, but I just happened to sit with him, and he did record some after discussion. He interviewed me afterwards.
Oh,
but
that's
I don't
great.
think that
Yeah.
because it is so subjective to the experience. I will say that that's why I asked the question about dose, because I know what dose he uses. And there is a marked difference. I was a facilitator of a clinic in Mexico using this medicine. So I've seen a lot of patients, and there is a big difference in the experience dose-wise, which is what you're seeing on the web, where you see people rolling around with eyes rolling back in their head and stuff. That's really, a lot of it is dose dependent. And in the smaller doses, that's why he used a smaller dose in his studies, because you can get someone to lay still. You have some level of cognition on the medicine that you are to be laying still, whereas the higher doses, you lose that faculty completely. As far as your question about the differences in the bufo coming from the toad versus a plant, there's a lot of discussion about that. I don't know that anybody has definitive answers yet, but some of the things that they're suggesting is that the amount of 5-MeO that's measurable in the toad is really subjective to the medicine coming from that toad. And usually the medicines that they're using, is from 1,000 toads. So when they go harvesting, they're pulling medicine out of 1,000 toads in a night that goes into a jar. You don't know which toad, or and I don't think that level of study has been done yet, isolating where it's coming from and the level of the 5-MeO versus bufotenine and how that's working together versus a plant, which you're getting, the pure, it's 99.9% 5-MeO plant. It's those studies.
Right, and then of course made in a lab, like it's even going to be more like precisely done.
Where you're pulling from the toad, you don't really know what, and there's a lot of conflicting data on how much is in what toad, what's coming from the toad. As far as experience-wise, from my anecdotal, experience with that, is that you get a much more like earthy, grounding feeling with the toad versus with the plant extracts. You're having a much more light, ethereal kind of experience, and that's just what you hear in the differences on that.
Beautiful, thank you. Yeah. So for him, he did report that he had what is it called? It's a total complete release. So that he was because there's a point with 5-MeO where you just consciousness just seems to go away. And then you pop in somewhere else in this white space. And so because he had done it once before and was aware of what that was like, he was like, yes, I disappeared and died. Yeah, but it wasn't like really like extreme. And they did go lower. Like I said, I believe it was around 60. So that wouldn't be like 100 or 90 or something like that. Yeah. It's, but that's really, there's still a lot we don't know. There's still a lot we don't know. And a lot of it is because you get to know you work with it and all of that. Yeah. Cool,
Dario?
thank you. Yes.
So with many entheogens, there's like a traditional like shamanism behind them that you can learn from. But I don't know, is there like a long history of use of this 5-MeO from a toad? Because in the Vice documentary, they interviewed a researcher who suggested that it's a pretty modern thing.
Yeah, my understanding
it's not
is
actually like a traditional medicine at all.
Well, yes and no. So what I've read, and I'm not an expert on its history, but what I have read is one is that there's a number of substances out there, plant substances, that have 5-MeO DMT. Not as much as the bufo frog, but they do. And some of those have been taken for a while. Specifically from the toad, but from this desert toad, it does sound like that's more recent, like quite recent. So the tradition of using this chemical structure is there, but not in this means. That's sort of what it's, I don't know, you may know more about the history of it.
Dr. Reddick did an extensive presentation at the ayahuasca conference on the anthropological evidence supporting the use of this medicine back 2,000 years among the, I don't know if it's the Aztecs or the Mayans in the coastal region of Mexico. And he did a whole presentation on the toad and the worship of the toad showing up in.
That's right. There is statuary and stuff like that.
Right.
Yes.
And it goes back several thousand years to those people.
I wonder if there's evidence for that. It's interesting.
Yeah. Well, and now that I remember seeing like slides of of like the toad. And this is like, did they just like toads, or was like there's something more? Yeah. There's probably something more. Okay, so let's take a 2-minute break. Yeah. Just so the body in the first half today. So the second half, if your brains are feeling a little bit hungry or tired, we're going to be a little bit gentler right now. We're going to explore some things like what happens during meditation and the sort of distributed nervous system, take a look at what that's about, and then see what happens when people use not just a device like this, which hopefully we can demo, but what goes on during meditation. Can we get some similar kinds of effects? I did have some stuff I was going to talk about with Psyche, but when I looked at the time, I decided we need to cut out about 7 slides, and so we're just going to jump ahead slightly. But do know that I can make this available online, and you can read it, or not online, but you will get like a mailed version, or you can ask me for it, and you'll see like the full slide section. So I'm just going to jump ahead a little bit.
Is that in your book?
Some of the slides are in the book, but a lot of this came from a workshop I did in the UK, and for a very particular group of people who would look at Jungians, and they wanted to know like how does meditation and the brain activity relate to the Jungian functions and stuff like that. So, and those Jungian functions are in here, but some of this is very recent, like just in April. Yeah, in fact, if I really want to be authoritative, then I can use my British accent, which is really overdone right now. I mean, I don't want to be a Disney character, but I can be. All it takes is a few days, and I'm back in England. I can do Arkansas accent too, but then you might not take me seriously. I do. My dad and stepmother retired to Arkansas, and I picked it up really quickly. I can. I mean, my name is Bill Clinton, and I did not sleep with that woman. I treated her like I would treat my own daughter. Hopefully that's not on tape. Please excuse me. So sorry. Speaking of which, being very spiritual, ancient traditions. Why not? Yin and yang, right? The ancient traditions describe practices to awaken, energize body, mind, and spirit. And a lot of those have a meditative component, prayer component, practices that try and bring body and mind together. And just some inspirational pictures to see here, and the sort of Christianity and Buddhism. And isn't it great? I really love this idea of the heart on fire, because one of the ways that people can experience Kundalini, besides like the racing up and down of the spine and so on, does anybody practice Kundalini here? Okay, so the racing up and down with the spine and the energy column, that's one. Another one is that with the solar plexus and the heart chakra can really like just have like a burst forth and feel very much on fire and very alive and energetic. And I found that really fascinating after I had that experience to then be reminded. My grandmother had this picture of basically the heart that's on fire. And a little bit like that, but it's on fire there. And I wonder, does that image come from somewhere? So people's actual lived experiences. But now a lot of people don't know what that picture means. They think it's just metaphorical or inspirational. But actually people have had, energy experiences and from meditation and prayer and whatnot, and that came out of it. In Buddhism, of course, well, you see they both have halos. In fact, they all three have halos. Like Buddhism even has, I remember researching around the internet, and they also have a heart on fire as well, as an iconography, not very common, but it's an iconography that's there. And of course, this idea of having the halo and the energy that's there. Well, what is this energy? And so some people talk about, with the chakras, and there's some kind of energy system in our body. So just sort of coming with this historically and wanting to know, what's maybe going on here? Do we have a lesson? Maybe this is some piece of information when we look at things like meditation.
I think it's interesting that the heart is for Christ. Christ is about the heart, Buddha is all about the mind, and Kundalini just wants everything to explode. It's great.
It is. It's very inspirational, and it really does. One of the things that Carl Jung, in fact, that was some of the slides that were there, talked about Kundalini in 1932. He gave a series of 4 talks. I really felt he described the experience so well. I'm like, this dude either really had some great interviews with people and transcribed their experiences really well, or he had some experience himself. Because even when he talks about Anja, which is like the 6th chakra, that sounds exactly like 5-MeO experience where you're in the white light and all of that. It's just, you read it off the page and it's really striking. So that was part of that motivation that was there with the chakras. It's what's going on there? So Jung does a lot of analysis of the imagery that comes out of Hinduism, for example, and why did they use the iconography that they do historically? What is it trying to say and represent? What is it trying to encode as a teaching piece for each? Why is there an elephant? It's not just randomly elephants are cute. It's there for a reason to teach. So one of the questions I get a lot of from people, these Jungian folks, is what is the unconscious? Okay, this is an important part of the psyche. Jung was the first person to do a scientific experiment around unconscious thinking, and when he was working with Freud still, and so it traces all the way back to him. And then of course he went on to speculate about the unconscious beyond the experiments and just more from his interactions. So it could come from many different things. One is that it could be automatic behaviors. And the reason I'm talking about the unconscious is because when people do these entheogens, a lot of times it feels like there was information that was out of conscious awareness. It doesn't mean suppressed necessarily. It could be a variety of things, but it's something that comes to the surface. And it could be negative stuff that needs to be dealt with and cleaned out and processed, or it could be very positive things. And the sort of the experience of, entheogen, the experience of God from within. So we could have stuff that's just automatic behaviors we're unaware of, and that these can conflict with each other. The brain has all these different networks going on at once. Do you think your brain is perfectly organized so that everything is coherent and makes sense with everything else? Does any human being have that? Well, maybe not. Let's take a look. So you could have these impulses from a primitive limbic system might push some kind of advice. Okay? And then your developed part, your neocortex, your executive regions will say, no, you shouldn't do that. Sort of like when you see the cake and you're like, that cake looks really good. I love chocolate. I figure I'm blessed, okay? Because I've had an allergy to eggs all of my life, so I can't eat a lot of desserts. Otherwise I'd be fat. Because I can't eat the dessert because I'll be very sick. But otherwise, I'll be eating it. So, this part of the brain up in front, the neocortex executive region is just no, don't. You have to exert willpower. So you can have these conflicts that are between different layers of the brain. Also things like racism, inappropriate retractions, knowledge that hinders survival. There's a great experiment that was done in marketing It was a group of women who were recruited to watch some commercials, TV commercials. And they monitored their brain activity as they were watching these TV commercials. And one of them included GoDaddy. And GoDaddy is an internet hosting service that has a female race car driver as their mascot. And she features in the commercial. And a lot of women in the group afterwards, after they watched the commercial, they debriefed the group verbally, and they said, well, we found that commercial very sexist. Like, it's just trying to appeal, like, because she has a figure and she's wearing leather and all of that, and it's just trying to appeal to men's baser instincts. And this is what the feedback they got. Well, the folks who were doing the brain imaging, though, said, that's not what your brain said. Your brain said, actually, you were really engaged and liked her, because they were using fMRI, not just EEG. So they're looking at the limbic system, and they're like, yeah, positive regions of the limbic system involved with things like bonding and identification. Needless to say, the group got very upset when they heard this news. But it happens, okay? I've even seen, I've had couples come. I remember a boyfriend, girlfriend came, and they had to go through this virtual, like a Tinder kind of thing. I know I'm cruel. And you would think that they're going to be attracted to the person in like the little like 24 like Tinder options that looks like their partner. No. The gal was attracted to like the very like traditional American looking football player, and her boyfriend didn't look anything like him. And he was sort of disconcerted, but then he also selected the gal that was like in the bikini on the beach with blonde hair and like all of this, and she didn't look anything like that. But of course they're like, but that's, the limbic thing is, the response is not the only reason to be with someone. So we can have those kinds of conflicts. So I don't want to suggest sometimes it's like, oh, always the stuff that's like unconscious or in the limbic system or whatever is bad. It's just like we have inherent conflicts as human beings. Some of it's just like we come from monkeys, we have this history, you grew up a certain way, like whatever it is, and then the neocortex is like, no, or no, you should go over here. So that's part of the baggage that we're coming with. We can have underdeveloped or underused brain regions. These regions are maybe, they're just outside of our ingrained habits. They work slowly. They don't work well together. You know, if you've never trained as a musician, then you're going to have sort of basic musical understanding, but you'll never have that musician training that's there unless you do it. So parts, circuits that might develop for like, playing violin or whatever are not going to develop. There are also going to be circuits we get stuck in. I suspect that there are a number of things. People say they're having a hard time, like they're depressed. I'm like, depressed because why? Are you like, are your needs not getting met? Is it a chemical imbalance? Are you stuck in like some kind of brain circuit that's just constantly giving you like negative feedback? Maybe we just need to break that brain circuit. Just break it up, okay? We also have parts of the right hemisphere that are completely nonverbal, that are not connected even close to parts of the left hemisphere that are good for verbalizing stuff. So when somebody asks you, like, why is that joke funny? Okay, you guys heard of what's the difference between plagiarism and research?
Citation.
Well, the plagiarism is you steal from one person. The research is when you copy from many people. Yeah. No, I had to ask, why is that funny? By the time you explain it, it's not funny anymore. Because the part of the brain that turns out, like in the right front area over here, like that actually gets the joke, it lights up when we get the joke, like that's not on the left side of the brain that's going to explain why. So by the time it has to move over to another hemisphere, it's like, all the meaning is lost. There could be just nervous energy in the body, patterns that are activated or stored throughout the nervous system. Okay, we don't even know exactly how that works yet, but we do have this sense. I'm very skeptical of like Spock's brain concept. You just take the brain out and put it in like a robot or something. Like that's not going to be you anymore. It's a brain, but where's the rest of the nervous system? We know from athletes, okay, the things that they do involve things like muscle memory. So when you watch this great thing on Russian, what is it when they dance in the pool? There's a word for like the follies. Synchronized swimming. They're so amazing, and they actually showed in like little like micro time instruments how the Russians were just like so far ahead of everyone else. Because like in our normal speed of watching things, it looks like two people are synchronized, but when you really slow it down, you see they're not. But with the Russians, no, the Russian movement, they were perfect. Like even the most difficult moves, they were absolutely perfectly synchronized. And a lot of it was coordination between the brain up here, consciously even, and the entire body. It was really, really cool to see. So when people ask me questions like, what is the unconscious? Or what is the stuff that's coming forth when people do like ayahuasca or something like that? I'm like, that's a really good question. Because unconscious doesn't mean one thing. The stuff that's coming up or that you have to deal with isn't coming from just one place. It could be many different things. It could be becoming aware of something that's actually very like well-connected part of your brain that's active, but it's being filtered out and suppressed for some reason.
Technically, it's everything that's not conscious, right?
Well, since we really don't know what consciousness is beyond where we direct our attention, right, that doesn't help so much, yes. What is death? Well, it's everything that's not alive. Yes. So there are ways to become aware of unconscious or semi-conscious conflicts to release them and to rebalance or re-energize the body. We know this, and so this gets into a part of what is the purpose of meditation, what is the purpose of mindfulness. So I think you've mentioned mindfulness is a really great term that is accepted in the medical literature that we can talk about. Things like where does meditation fit, where does exploring like the unconscious, where does healing as an entheogenic concept, where does that fit? So I do believe meditation is more than just like, oh, like I'm in Hollywood and I want to be with the cool folks meditating and I'm going to relax my brain. Like there really is, I think, more that can happen with that. And certainly the entheogens have suggested that. So to paint a picture of what sort of goes on here, I don't do research with the limbic system, but I feel like I need to mention it, at least what's in the literature. I really don't like doing that, mentioning stuff that I haven't worked with firsthand, but I'm going to do that for our benefit. Together, we'll do it. So attachment, pair bonding, this is like the old part of the brain. It's that cat dog, that monkey brain that's there. Okay? This is the part of your brain that thinks one way that isn't the educated, civilized way of thinking about things. Attachment, pair bonding, like why do you love your parents? Even if you hate them, you still love them. Okay, blame your limbic system. Body language, sexual signaling. Why are you attracted to people you're attracted to? Blame your limbic system. Being slightly facetious. Deeply seated prejudices, superstitions, such as fear of the dark, aversion to toxic-looking substances. Here's some delicious vomit. You'd be like, ew, even just thinking about that. Encoding of information from short-term to long-term memory, so the long-term memory stuff. Instinctual reactions, fight or flight response, strong emotional reactions, rage, terror, those kinds of things. So that's it. This part of the brain down here is very different from what's explored, what we've explored so far. So looking at all the clue that I have is this idea of an alpha state and the alpha waves and theta waves. One of the things that looks like happens is that with the alpha, it lets in that information from the limbic system, not just to retrieve it objectively, like what happened in that memory, but like you feel the memory again. Like there's an affective component that influences you. There's the passion, there's the biases. You feel embodied or subjective. And then theta is it's much more automatic routine stuff coming from the neocortex, and there is an element that looks like it grabs information from the limbic system, but the stuff that would send up the impulses for like a really strong reaction, like because of passion or whatever it is, like no, there's no response there. It's pushed down. It's like a shield that happens. So that's why I draw it like a bow. So there's a shield there that prevents them sort of from communicating, influencing each other too much, or it could be like there's a really good connection. That isn't the only thing that these wave bands are associated with, but there's some research that suggests that. More than suggests, I mean, it's there. So it can feel more detached or objective or just automatic in its style. So we have that's sort of how the EEG research, what I can do connect with that. But beyond that, there's a whole world of the limbic system and the broader body in general. The vagus nerve system links the brain and the other organs. This is really cool, that your brain isn't just here. This is a very Western, I think recent, like 19th, 20th century concept that your brain is up here. Jung talked about this quite a bit. He's like, why is it the Westerners think that the brain is up here? You talk to other people, in Greece, ancient Greece, where you thought was from here. It's in the breath. Okay, there are some other people, traditional tribes, for example, even he talked about like Amazon tribes in the South Pacific, they think from here. That if there's something we're thinking about, you need to feel it in the gut, and if you don't feel it in the gut, then it's not real. And it's not even worth thinking about. You can turn on the news and you'll find out immediately, well, they're trying to appeal to the gut to get you to think about it, but almost everything in our society is up here. It's very cognitive. But the nervous system actually is really distributed all around the body. So the vagus nerve extends from the medulla, lower brain, along the brainstem, down the throat, heart, lungs, solar plexus, stomach, colon, the other nether regions. We know the gut is a major source of neurotransmitters like serotonin. It impacts our mood, overall mental health. Vagus nerve system produces calming parasympathetic response that counterbalances fight or flight. I think that's important, and we're going to see with the meditation what effect it may have. There are some speculations with this polyvagal theory that there are two kinds of vagus nerves. The one that is with all animals, sort of like drawn here, and then there's like another pathway that's unique to mammals. And then this part here goes up and affects facial expression and vocalization as well. There was just some research published recently connecting directly from the frontal areas of the brain, the executive regions, down to the immune system, the thymus. And they wondered, how did we go 200 years without discovering that there were actually nerve system going up there? The same with the adrenals. I was going to have a slide with that, but I ended up not putting that in. With the central regions of the neocortex here descend directly to connect with the adrenal glands. So really, there's like this wide system that happens here. Of course, we can consciously modulate our breathing to influence the nerve system to calm ourselves. And if I had the brain imaging on, I would do that right now. I just close my eyes. In fact, I don't even need to close my eyes now. I can just make all the brain activity go to zero, and just with the eyes open even. You just sort of stare and breathe and focus on your breathing, and that's what happens. So I was sort of aware of this, doing some research, but I really wondered how would this translate into stuff that connects with the entheogens, connects with meditation. There are modern treatments and ancient practices that stimulate the whole nervous system, the parasympathetic response. And of course, we know that modern living, anyone love driving in LA? Especially when you have to be, oh, that's so wonderful, good for you, good for you. Most of us know that it can cause, especially if we have a certain amount of time where we have to get somewhere. And I haven't appreciated this, but I've been here 18 years since I moved back to Los Angeles, and in that time the population of the city has increased and it's become more dense. And I didn't quite appreciate that until recently. But I was like, wow, I used to live here, and this area is like a lot heavier traffic than I remember. Either like my memory is faulty, or yeah, there's a lot more cars on the road. So we have a lot of things. By the way, do you think working at a computer, like responding to something, some horrible political thing that somebody posted on Facebook, is that healthy? Like you're ready to fall into the computer, it's like you're typing and you're all scrunched up, and modern living is horrible. I mean, it's as we continue doing it, and we laugh about it, but it's horrible. It can impair digestion, it can increase heart rate, like all of these things. We don't need convincing with this. In fact, what is it? They found that heavy Facebook users are more likely to be depressed than the average person, and all of these things. I think there was a reason why Steve Jobs wouldn't allow his kids to use mobile technology and wouldn't allow them to use things like Facebook and stuff like that. Like he knew, even as he was helping to invent some of this stuff, that it maybe weren't good for people. So, by the way, these are FDA approved. The vagus nerve stimulation is approved for depression and epilepsy. I didn't know this. And then what are techniques to do it? Elevates mood, shifts brain activity. That's all very good. It's been associated with increases in serotonin and GABA and so on, all things associated with sort of feeling good and thinking less or being more relaxed.
Give me a headache.
It's great. You feel like these waves coming upward. I don't know why you want to do this, but holding your breath, no, it's important. I'm not just holding my breath, I'm actually consciously bearing down. And in Kundalini Yoga, you have a process where you close your eyes and you move, there's a place you put your tongue and you bear down. You don't hold your breath, but essentially like that, but you're bearing down as you're doing it. So I thought that was really interesting. Another option is to immerse your face in ice cold water. I don't think we need to do that. I'll stick with the Kundalini. pressure on the eyelids and massaging of the artist's sinus areas there. Okay, so that's good. That's good to know. Traditional spiritual practices and medicines, deep breathing, yoga, stimulated as well. Multiple religious traditions describe transcendent experiences. So I might want to know maybe what's going on in the brain when people have not just 5-MeO, but are doing things like meditation. Is this easier to bring people into the lab? And in fact, for 10 years, I've been having people do meditation with every single one of them. So what goes on? First of all, people have different kinds of meditation experiences. There are definitely 3 or 4 different kinds of meditation modes, although a couple are much more, this one is the most common. Mindless TV brain. Meditation means I'm just going to shut off everything. However, a number of people show this more mindful state that's very alpha. It's very yellow, it's very body connected in a positive way. They're not meditating on Satan, okay? They're relaxed, but they're body connected. They can feel their toes. They feel their hands and their feet. The book describes there are actually people going through a therapeutic process to help people reground themselves in their body. And that really is the measure at the end of the 15 minutes, and you can see it, is they get into the space where they really are in their body again, connected around something positive that's a new behavior that the therapist is anchoring in, is a new resource. So for me, this would be really exciting to see this. Now, if we could also have like both gamma and alpha present, just like with the 5-MeO, that would be really awesome. In fact, could it be that after people have a couple of experiences with something like 5-MeO, would they then be able to revisit those experiences in some way, maybe soon afterwards, like the next day or whatever, to get some neurofeedback kind of training in order to revisit that brain state? I believe, and there are some people who are doing that. Rock Razam is an example, if you want to go to Australia. Although he does stuff in Mexico too, right? Yeah, yeah. A lot of good things are in Mexico these days. Why all the Mexicans are coming here, I don't know. They've been talking about that on the news. I can go to Mexico. Just kidding. Mindful integrated relaxation. So maybe that's a space we might want to find. Now, I have noticed, like I said, I've noticed that those two are the most common spaces people can find themselves in. When I was up in Seattle, there was a guy, I was working with a group of psychologists who want to use brain imaging, just like this kind of thing, in order to understand what's going on with their clients. Like when a client says, if you're trying to like anchor a new resource with them, or you're going back to a childhood experience or whatever, and you ask them like, are you feeling it? And they say, oh yeah, I'm feeling it. I can tell you sometimes people misreport. I'm not saying they're lying, they misreport. Because I'm like, no, the EEG says they're not feeling it. We had one person, I was working on the side with the therapist, so I'm like sitting over where you're sitting, and like he's with the client, or she's with the client, and she's like, you know, are you feeling it now? She's like leading him through a thing, and I'm like, no. And she discovered with him, for a time, she had to remind him every 10 to 15 seconds to get back into his body some way, to feel his fingers, to wiggle, like think about his toes, like to body connect himself. He had really, really disassociated. And so that was like one, some people really pose a challenge. Other people like can get in pretty quickly. Of those 5 psychologists, one of them has done Kundalini yoga for 10 years. She could just pop her brain into different spaces like that. Like really, really nicely. Now, I have noticed that there are, for many people, there are 2 particular regions in the right hemisphere that get active when people do meditation. And I'm just talking about what kind of meditation. So the standard protocol just asks people to relax and clear their mind and focus on their breathing. That's it. I do sometimes with people, if they have meditation experience, towards the end, they always have a 10-minute block where they can do something extra, and maybe they do like some special kind of meditation. I'm like, go ahead and do that, and we'll see what happens. Regardless, there are 2 regions that tend to become active. One of them is this, in the right hemisphere, this visual region in the back. What does this region do? It helps us, it responds to visual beauty, it notices the abstract qualities, the holistic qualities of things. So in everyday language, that means like the richness of a photograph or a painting or a landscape, noticing all of the colors and textures and shapes, not analyzing those, just noticing and appreciating them. Also involves visual impression of a person, like body language, which is another holistic visual quality. Really just goes back to visions in a holistic way. I noticed somebody who actually has amazing connectivity in this region here, And he is allergic to ugliness. That's how he describes it. Especially design. Anything like a building is badly designed or something like that, it's hideous. I've had a number of Japanese and Japanese American and exchange students from Japan, and this region is consistently more densely wired than compared to the American group. That might be because of their language, the written language, the kanji, and or it might be the sense of beauty in Japan and how that works aesthetically. Really, really interesting. I mean, there's lots of places you can go to Japan. Actually, it's funny, because Japan probably has the 10 most beautiful places in the world and the 10 ugliest. Because when they build something new that's just like for utilitarian purposes, I'm like, no. It's just like ugly, ugly building. But when they have a chance to like put in with their beautiful styles, in my opinion, it's gorgeous. And it really is so interesting. I had a Japanese older gentleman who was an accountant, and he was retired now. And I'm figuring accounting like going to be very left hemisphere. But he had tons and tons of stuff coming out of this region here. And I didn't find out until afterwards from the psychiatrist who was seeing him that actually guess what his hobby was? For most of his adult life was bonsai and Japanese gardening. And there was all these connections. I had somebody else who analyzes people's body language. Tons and tons of stuff coming right out of here. So very interesting to see. But this idea of like holistic vision. And the other region that gets very active is this region in the right frontal area. Not the prefrontal, which is the executive, but just sort of support over here. What has this been involved with? Some interesting things. One is that in the literature is associated with personal identity and beliefs. So like, who are you? What do you believe? When you ask people to talk about like their favorite things in life, who do they like, who do they not like, it's really interesting if I ask you to talk about, like say you have 3 roommates and you like some of them more than the others, the region might get more active the more you like them. I've met some people who were reversed though. I had one guy, every time he said something was an idiot or it was stupid or they were incompetent or something, that region got so active because he valued all of those negative things. So it's evaluating stuff in terms of like dislike is when it tends to get active. So that's I want to specify. It's not like we have a little region there that's like exactly does that, but it gets active when you give people tasks. So it contributes. It helps us with this. Interesting thing, people who suffer brain damage in this area may have a problem with modesty. And that includes clothing modesty as well as modesty of ideas. So sometimes I like to say, thank goodness for the brain damaged, because they help us understand the brain a lot better. Unfortunate for them, but they are contributing to our understanding. Also, recalling details in a way that's not embellished, not making inferences with high accuracy. Now, there's a reason why those 3 very different things might be in the same region, and I'm not going to go into that, but there's some theoretical ideas of how they're all related to each other. Really, really interesting then, why would these 2 regions here during meditation? The visual region I think we can understand, because and it is important to remember that there are times when the visual parts of the brain will become active, and you ask the person, were you visualizing anything? And they would say no. That does happen. And it's not that they weren't visualizing something, because by the way, parts of your brain can be active and you can be unconscious of that. There's nothing that says you have to know what's going on in your brain all the time. But it's just sort of interesting that these 2 regions, and maybe this here has something to do with like, you're trying to focus, of course. I don't know, is meditation an immodest activity? Are you making a bunch of inferences? Are you trying to be different than who you are while you're meditating? Is that helpful to meditation? It sounds like it might be all a distraction. I don't know, I just like have a sense that maybe there's something interesting going on there. We're going to see a case study of why that might be. So this is an individual, and I got actually to test him twice. He has practiced the diamond heart method of meditation. Now I didn't know this again when he came in. I do the session first and then we debrief afterward. I didn't do them in red, but you can see the dark links here show regions that were firing together frequently. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 regions firing very often. Now this is so afterwards, and by the way, so what does he do? He practices it and he teaches it. That's his job. He teaches meditation, this particular kind of meditation, for 20 years. So one thing I noticed right away is like, well, gee, it's nice he has like this little brain web here, the starburst pattern. It's probably coming out from the meditative process, like practicing that, getting all those regions to be in sync. These prefrontal regions are not very well connected. The executive, especially this executive, very goal-focused over here, doesn't really seem to be strongly connected to anything. He came into his therapist complaining of inability to form or follow through with goals. That was his complaint. I thought that was interesting. I'm like, well, no wonder, because it's not really connected to anything else. I asked him, what does this meditation technique involve? This was before the results. He says, well, the diamond heart involves this. He said it involves aligning the words that you speak, your actions, what you visualize, and how you attend to other people, and information that comes in a way that is aligned with your personal identity and beliefs. I'm like, wow, okay, because he didn't see this. It's not like I pointed this out to him, and I'm like, what did you get? I'm like, well, let's see. Meditation, align your words, spoken words, so that they really are, you are saying the things that align with who you are and what you believe. You take actions. This region here, this left central region here, somatosensory region, sensation, precise movement, especially with your right hand. Okay, the controlled movement. Vision over here, so this is focused vision as opposed to holistic, but analyzing the visual space. This region here actually does a lot of different things, sort of the temporal region here, but there is involved like responsiveness to social feedback from other people, processing of factual detail, and all connected over here. I'm like, wow, so your practice has really worked out for you for 20 years, like your brain is now wired. You have a diamond heart brain. So I think that attests, if you're going to do a practice, what do you think happens when you repeat something every day? He said he meditates on average 2 hours every day. First of all, that would drive me nuts. My brain would not want to do that. But this is just remarkable, I felt, how this turned out. And don't worry, you'll have access to these. Now, this one is somebody else who shall remain nameless. Brain neural shift, so this is like regular me and meditation me. That's why it's good to have. By the way, UCLA has a great program where students pay thousands of dollars to the university for 4 units, and then they come to work for me for free. It's really great. It is. 70 hours of like really top students. It's marvelous. And so what is it? This every day. This person will be called Joe, but it's not Joe. And so what do we see? Well, one is we see that this whole brain pattern is there naturally. There are some people who are like that. No wonder I'm doing like 10 different things all the time. The executive regions are pretty strong though, up here. Like so functioning adult, yay! What I think is really interesting though is despite this web pattern, this individual goal focus comes down, it has individual lines that go to specific things. And I know that about myself. Either I can be like whole brain or like I just focus exactly on one thing at a time. So if I'm washing the dishes, I'm only doing that. I'm like, don't talk to me. I'm doing the dishes. I'm not quite that. I can chew and pat my head at the same time, and gum and walk. But that's neither here nor there. But there is that focus element. Precise speech, of course, it's very important. I'm doing precise speech now for the past 2 hours. Back of the brain stuff that's pretty active over here. I know I don't seem like I'm introverted, but I'd like to introvert. I like to process information before I say something about it. So that's my regular me. And I've tested myself several times over the years. It shifts slightly, but not tremendously. And by the way, notice this is sort of sparsely connected over here. I'm not somebody who would normally, like in day-to-day life, I'm like, oh, should I say that? Do I believe that? Something like, I don't know, I am who I am. But this is me during meditation. And I just it's some Kundalini meditation, but I also bring in my own stuff with it. We see this whole brain flow still that's going on. Okay, that's what I expect. What happened to the executive regions up here? Oops. Well, maybe it's a good thing. Maybe they turned off. Send them out of the room. Don't need them. So for me, that's definitely a step I have to go through, like just push the executive regions out. Strong links to personal identity. Look at this troika here of 3 regions firing in sync with each other in the right hemisphere. Personal identity, beliefs, voice tone, a little bit of intention. Intention is more like there's like a neural bridge that runs between these 2 regions. But body kinesthetic awareness through here, somatosensory awareness, like what's going on in my body, all that kind of stuff. if I just compared these two people statistically, like their R value is not very high. Like they look like they're different people. If I just randomly brought them in as subjects, I'd be like, oh yeah, this is different people for sure. Because when you test and retest somebody, generally these they're pretty similar to each other from one time to the next. This is not the same, but it's a different person when I'm meditating. I think that's really neat to get into the space. It's like much more belief grounded, much more physical, sensory grounded. I still have that whole brain connection that's there. I have versions of myself before I ever tried any kind of Kundalini meditation or entheogens or whatnot, so I know that I had that pattern from before. But really, really neat to see that, like, wow, okay, during meditation I shift. The brain wiring shifts. Okay, now we're gonna do some demonstration here with the EEG, but before we do that, it's like 5 minutes of questions on this part. I know it's a little bit more like open-ended. Oh yes, absolutely. So,
$10
yes, it's normally on Amazon, it's $19.95. On the Radiance House website, it's cheaper because I know how Amazon works and I'm going to undersell them. But for you all, it's just $10. And you'll see similar slides as there were here and some other ones, of course. It's nicely laminated. The printer gave me a special with that. And yeah, fairly recent. I like to give people things that they can share with others and are colorful.
So then, these typical brain states, because obviously when you're meditating, it's different than your everyday. But so, is that going to look the same if you're doing math versus drawing and all these things? Like, how do you? What are they doing? The average?
This is because I use the same protocol with people. Basically, this is a summation over an hour, plus or minus 10 minutes, and it's a summation over the different wavelengths as well. So it includes gamma and theta and alpha and so on. It's like all sort of, there's just like one composite picture. Yeah.
But doing a particular set of tasks?
Doing the same, it's a very wide variety. So it includes like meditation, math, value sorting, solving or responding to an ethics problem, using words in a creative manner, making up sentences, using my cell phone, drawing my hand, like on and on, like 20 different things.
Right.
It's supposed to give like a portrait of a person that it would come out like stimulating different parts of the brain in different ways over the course of an interesting day. An interesting day at the office is what I say, because the person's sitting most of the time. Until the end, we get them up and then they can toss a ball and do some very mild physical activity. Nothing, you don't want to be strenuous, you don't want to mess up the EEG, but yeah. Other questions? Yes?
Could you use this technology for certain things like lie detection or diagnosing personality disorders, stuff like that?
I mean, the EEG fell out of favor a little bit in the mid-90s with fMRI, and then maybe the mid-2000s it seems to pop back into popularity and people are discovering new uses for it. I think in part because it has real-time responsiveness. It's much cheaper than fMRI, and we have new analytical techniques. Like these kinds of diagrams, people were not, at least that I know of, like this is much more recent to do this kind of thing. It's computer power, basically. It allows it. I know I actually did lie detection experiments in the first couple of years of using EEG to see what would happen. For most people, just the brain gets more active when they're lying because they have to get active to construct a lie on the spot. However, I did find that there was, I don't remember what the statistics were, somewhere between 5 and 10%. It was more like 5%, I think, of people that you literally could not tell from the brain activity what was a lie and what was truthful. And they all had a particular similar personality profile as well. And it's not that they were always good at lying. It was a really interesting topic to sort of tease out because the lab was a particular situation where I asked them to lie about something they don't really care about. So I remember one guy, he was just no change in brain activity when he would lie. And so I asked him, like, are there times when you find lying difficult? He understood what I mean. And he's like, yes. He says, when I'm dating, like, my girlfriend, it's like, I have no idea what she wants me to tell her. So I can't just make up any lie, because it needs to be a lie that she'll believe, that she'll like, but I don't know. I can't read her very well. In fact, he said he can't read people very well. Now, I had another student who was awful at lying. Like, the brain activity, like, not only would be off the scale, but she actually couldn't utter the lie. Not because she was like self-righteous or something, you know, good-hearted person per se. It's she's like, there's so many possible lies, I don't know which one to pick. And I'm like, oh, are there times when you find lying very easy? And she's like, oh yeah, with my boyfriend it's really easy because I always know what he wants to hear. So it was a reminder that even something like, a very basic thing like lying depends so much upon the context of the experiment, the context of what we're talking about. Cognition is so much embedded within a larger system. And it's interesting in a way that meditation is something that is, you're going inside of yourself and you're closing off in that larger system, but the history of who you are is still very much there. And all the things that are going on and so forth. In terms of other things, there are some techniques right now to look at like the difference in alpha activity between this region and this region right here. And if there's a big difference between them, then apparently you can tease out things that are happening in the limbic system with regard to like emotional disorders. But I don't work with that kind of category of subjects. Occasionally there's a psychiatrist at UCLA, I help him in his private practice, but I just sit the patient, like run the report, send them through the protocol and give him the result. And then he does whatever he does with them. And then those folks are different. But for the most part, I don't know, because I work with a normal population. Yeah.
How does this work compared to like biofeedback? Figure out what biofeedback is.
Oh, well, biofeedback is a general term that could be any kind of feedback that's given about how you're sort of getting live feedback of what's going on in the body. It could be heart rate, it could be the brain.
Fall under the umbrella?
Yeah, so well, I don't do, this is called neurofeedback. I don't do neurofeedback because I'm not a clinician. I'm certified to work with people that way. I don't diagnose or treat anything. But there are people who use EEG for neurofeedback, for sure. So somebody could come in, there are actually lots of clinics in Los Angeles. There are a lot of clinicians who do neurofeedback. Person will say I'm feeling a little clumsy, or I frequently lose my keys, or I'm a little depressed, or I have a hard time focusing or making decisions, or whatever. They come in, and there are some general ideas about the functionality of the brain. And then, okay, we're going to work with you, and there's a couple of ways to do it. But basically, you're trying to raise activity in parts of the brain, or change the wavelength that's there from, say, alpha to theta, or theta to beta, or whatever it is you want to do, to help the person in that part of the brain. Get it more active, get it more synchronized, whatever it is. And they have some ways to do that. I don't know, because that's not what I practice, but I mean, I could explain some, but we'd have to really go off into it. But there is. You can type in neurofeedback in Los Angeles, and you'll get like tons of stuff. Yeah, good stuff.
Does, for instance, OCD show up in?
This is a really interesting question. I was just reading an article about, is a meta-study on all like the DSM disorders. And they were looking for, are there parts of are there networks in common that are shared between these? They found that OCD was statistically the most like all other mental disorders, which came as a shock, because they thought, oh, it's so specific. But I wasn't really surprised, because it involves like a loop of activity that you're trapped in. Mm-hmm. And so I believe a lot of things are related to a loop of some kind of activity that we're trapped in. The one that was the biggest outlier was PTSD. PTSD is statistically the least like all of the others. So it's like very generalized. It isn't just like one loop of something that's in the sort of default network. It really is something that's like all over the brain. It's affecting it in various ways. So I just thought that was interesting. But again, like I don't work with that kind of population, so I don't know. Yeah. The upper left, don't worry about that. It's only going to get active when you're sleeping. The upper right is the theta band. So basically, the more red and orange and yellow you see, the more active this region is with the brain. My brain's pretty active right now. The upper right up there it says theta there. So theta is the that automatic routine behaviors, so disassociated state. The one that we're interested in for meditation is down at the lower left. And that region is involved with, say, alpha, so that's like the body connected and the sort of internal state when you might use meditation or imagination or something like that. You can see that there are several regions that are really active for me. In particular, this one on the right side, down towards the bottom. See, it has like an epicenter of activity there. that red one. And you also notice on the left side, coming out towards like the middle and the front there. So the reason the one on the right, sort of lower down, is active is because that region is involved in noticing visual patterns. And what am I doing here? But I'm looking at visual patterns. So it's actually reporting what it is that I'm doing as I'm looking at the screen. Then the beta gamma one on the lower right here, this corner down here, is like where there's active and excitement and stuff like that. So my brain isn't frozen. I just had like a burp there. Yeah, it really is competing against some other signals or something. So I'll just sit here. And as you can see, well, I'm going to try and relax now because my brain is pretty active.
So is this technology different than a regular EEG where you have pairs of electrodes measuring it different?
Fundamentally, it's the same. It just it uses saline instead of a gel. Like, I don't normally see a book like that. And nor was it consistently like 1 minute or something. It could be, basically it was like 40 seconds to a minute and a half. And it was just for that set period of time in the first phase of the 5-MeO. The second phase didn't show that. Yeah, so there did seem to be some kind of pinging that happened.